Tracy Sable tonight on EWTN News Nightly. First veto. President Joe Biden shoots down a bipartisan measure. We're at the White House. Speaking out. U.S. bishops issue a warning about gender reassignment surgeries. Headed to the polls. The first day of in-person voting in a high-stakes race in Wisconsin. And footsteps of the Holy Family. A conference in Rome examines their trip to Egypt to escape King Herod. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on this feast of St. Nicholas of Flue. Our top story tonight, the Vatican has released the theme and schedule for the Holy Father's trip to Hungary next month. Under the slogan, Christ is our future, Pope Francis will meet with the European country's president and prime minister, as well as church leaders and seminarians. He will also deliver 2 public speeches during his trip, April 28th through the 30th. Well, back here in the United States, the White House takes aim at Republicans in Congress for trying to pass a Parents' Bill of Rights. The Biden administration claims the education bill does not actually help parents. Supporters say it will be of help to families and teachers. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
The Parents' Bill of Rights Act is known as H.R. 5 on Capitol Hill and has more than 100 co-sponsors. But tonight, the White House is rejecting it, pushing back against the bill even before it comes up for a vote.
Representative Julie Letlow stands behind her proposed Parents' Bill of Rights. The bill requires schools to notify parents and guardians of their rights regarding the education of their children, including review the curriculum of their child's school and inspect the books and other reading materials in the library of their child's school. It also says an elementary school or a school consisting of only grades 5 through 8 must obtain parental consent before 1. Changing a minor child's gender markers, pronouns, or preferred name on school forms, or 2. Allowing a child to change the child's sex-based accommodations. But the White House Office of Management and Budget writes, instead of making LGBTQI+ students feel included in their school community, it puts them at higher risk, adding, legislation should not politicize our children's education. President Joe Biden is also rejecting a bill that would have banned the government from basing investment decisions on issues like climate change. It marks the first veto of his administration. And it comes as his Treasury Secretary tries to reassure Americans that the country's banking system is sound.
The government's recent actions have demonstrated our resolute commitment to take the necessary steps to ensure that depositors' savings and the banking system remain safe.
Janet Yellen's comments come after Silicon Valley Bank failed and some other regional banks collapsed. Meanwhile, President Biden speaks at the Interior Department to announce the creation of new national monuments in Nevada and Texas.
I just know it as Spirit Mountain in Nevada. It's one of our most beautiful landscapes.
Separately, President Biden did sign a bill agreeing to declassify more information about the origins of COVID-19, which has killed millions of people around the globe. U.S. intelligence agencies are divided over the source of the virus, a lab leak or a spillover from animals. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Our former president and 2024 candidate Donald Trump is bracing his supporters, saying today is the day he'll be arrested. At issue, the question of whether the former president illegally covered up a payment to his lawyer. The money, which totaled $130,000, was allegedly paid to an adult film star to keep her quiet about a past relationship ahead of the 2016 election. The former president denies both the affair and the alleged cover-up. And joining us now with more is Tom Bevin, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics. Tom, always great to be with you. First off, what do you make of all this? I mean, if former President Trump is arrested, it would be a first.
It would be an historic event, and a lot of people think not in a good way, setting a real scary precedent moving forward. And certainly, you know, the news was, the initial rumor was that it was going to happen today. Now people are suggesting that the indictment may come tomorrow, but an arraignment of President Trump wouldn't happen until next week. And obviously we've seen The New York Police Department is bracing for potential unrest and protests. The president has called for protests. So it's a very dicey situation. The charges against him, according to most legal experts, this is a stretch by Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney. And so I think it's a very perilous moment for the country in terms of, are we going to cross this Rubicon and perhaps arrest and indict a former president of the United States, and, by the way, the leading GOP candidate for 2024.
Yeah, Tom, explain to us what's the actual crime here, and could President Trump potentially go to prison?
Well, as you mentioned, it is about this payment that was made to Stormy Daniels, and it, in all accounts, would be considered a misdemeanor. And has been in the past considered a misdemeanor, but for some reason, the Manhattan DA has decided to upgrade this to a felony charge, which would mean the president could potentially spend some time in prison. I mean, I assume that his lawyers would figure out a way to not make that happen, to keep him out of prison, probation of some sort, and a fine, community service, something like that. But nevertheless, just the scene of the president, if he gets his mugshot taken, if he has fingerprints taken, I mean, all of this is really, as I said, setting a precedent that that could lead us. It's the continued criminalization of our politics, because again, this is not a case that most experts think would be brought against others in similar situations.
Yeah, and of course, the timing really is very curious for all this. As we mentioned, former President Trump is officially in the race for the White House again. That said, what are the implications here on the political front? And how do you think this will play out for President Trump? Do you think this will diminish or bolster support for him?
It's hard to say how this will affect him. I mean, he is such a unique political figure. Every time that he has been according to his words, persecuted by Democrats and the media, whether it's, impeachment, the raid at Mar-a-Lago, it seems to galvanize people to his side, his supporters certainly, but even those who might not be huge Trump supporters, but because the way that it seems Democrats and the media sometimes overplay their hand when it comes to Donald Trump, even people who, aren't huge supporters of President Trump, end up defending him because of the way that he's often treated. We'll have to see. Will it play out that way again this time? Perhaps. It's obviously never a good thing to be arrested. I mean, you can argue whether it's fair or not, but certainly to a percentage of the public, that's going to be seen as a negative. Within the Republican primary, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I want to pivot to something else. We're almost out of time here, but I want to talk about this President Biden. An Iowa poll was released yesterday revealing that his approval rating has now hit a new low. Only 30% of Iowans say that they approve of his job performance. Your thoughts on this, Tom? What do you make of this?
Well, interestingly, 29% of independents approve, but 75% of Democrats and only 3% of Republicans. So as is the case with everything these days, we are in a tribal environment where, no Republicans support him, 75% of Democrats support him, but independents are pretty sour. Democrats are skipping Iowa this time. They're going to move they've already moved their primary schedule. So it's not, but it's been a Republican state for the last couple of cycles. So this is not necessarily shocking news. But again, it portends ill for President Biden that in a swing state like Iowa, in the heartland of America, that he's only polling it at 30% job approval rating. That is not a good sign for him.
Yeah, and Tom, before I let you go quickly, what else are you following?
Well, we're obviously keeping an eye on what's going to happen over the weekend here with President Trump and the latest polls. You mentioned Republican primary. Trump has actually been gaining ground against Ron DeSantis in Republican primary polls. So we'll have I'm sure as soon as if this indictment happens, if an arraignment happens, there will be pollsters in the field, and we'll be watching closely for those numbers to see, as you mentioned, Tracy, just exactly how this might affect the dynamic in the Republican primary. Yeah,
we're going to leave it right there. Tom, always great to be with you. Thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Well, in-person voting began today in the high-stakes Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. A Republican and a Democrat are vying to join the state's high court. The runoff early next month will determine majority control. The justices are expected to hear cases on abortion, voting rights, and other issues. Our U.S. Catholic bishops are speaking out against gender transitioning procedures. They are also offering moral guidance to Catholic health institutions. In a statement released yesterday, the bishops say, quote, Catholic healthcare services must not perform interventions, whether surgical or chemical, that aim to transform the sexual characteristics of a human body into those of the opposite sex or take part in the development of such procedures. The bishops also say the gender procedures are harmful and do not respect the fact that God created each person as He intended them to be. Lawmakers are back on Capitol Hill. Two major pieces of legislation are on the agenda, one in each chamber. House Republicans intend to pass a new energy bill that uses fossil fuels. Meanwhile, the Senate hopes to end decades-old war authorizations. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with the latest. Eric.
Good evening, Tracy. You know, both the Persian Gulf and the Iraq wars may officially be coming to an end very soon. Both the Senate and the House are taking aim at repealing war authorizations that were given to President George H.W. Bush and President Bush more than 2 decades ago. Actually, the lead sponsor of the bill is Republican Senator Todd Young, who says that it's about time.
We are going through the responsible, much needed, and I have to say much neglected work of finally legally bringing a war to a close.
Democratic Senator Tim Kaine is the other major sponsor. He says Iraq is no longer an enemy, but a valued ally.
It's a security partner to battle against ISIS or other non-state terrorist groups and to check Iranian aggression in the region. There's no reason, none, to have a war authorization against a strategic partner.
But not everyone is on board. Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville tells me he's not convinced repealing the authorizations will prevent future terrorist attacks against American interest in Iraq.
I voted no a while ago because I would probably vote no unless I'm convinced that it's the right thing to do. I don't like change unless it's a perfect scenario where it will help make things better.
A final passage vote may take place this week. Meanwhile, over in the House, Republicans are busy promoting a key legislative initiative, a new energy bill.
This will help curb inflation, lower the price of energy, and help make America energy independent. Also, cut the permitting time, will help with infrastructure, help with renewable energy as well.
But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the bill is dead on arrival.
H.R. 1 will lock America into the most expensive and volatile, dirty sources of energy, will set America back a decade or more in our transition towards clean, affordable energy. The package is a wish list for big oil.
And by the way, the House is expected to pass the Lower Energy Costs Act later this week, but it doesn't have the votes right now to be able to pass in the Senate. But talks are taking place right now over in the Senate to speed up the energy project approvals. So we're going to continue to be watching that. From the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
The last diplomat from the Vatican has left Nicaragua. The move comes after the Ortega regime asked the Holy See to close its diplomatic headquarters earlier this month. The last diplomat, a priest and a business manager, is now in Costa Rica. China's leader is on day 2 of a 3-day visit to Russia. After an hours-long state dinner last night, official talks took place today at the Kremlin. President Xi Jinping says that he wants to increase the trade relationship between Beijing and Moscow. Officials also reference a, quote, no-limits friendship between the countries. They also pledged to further develop their, quote, strategic cooperation. The death toll has risen past 500 people as southeastern Africa struggles to recover from Cyclone Freddy. Thousands of houses were also destroyed in Malawi and Mozambique, leaving almost 500,000 people displaced. Officials fear the death toll could climb as search and rescue operations continue. The cyclone also has ruined nearly 900 schools and 80 healthcare facilities. We have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including human rights violation, why a top European court is condemning an arrest in Russia, and a flight to Egypt. A conference in Rome dives into the Holy Family's journey to the transcontinental country. Europe's top human rights court has condemned Russia for the arrest and punishment of a Christian pastor. Reverend Donald Ossewaarde was arrested and fined for hosting a peaceful prayer gathering in his house in 2016. But just last week, the European Court of Human Rights called the arrest a clear breach of human rights. And joining us tonight with more on this is Dr. Felix Bowman, Director of European Advocacy for Alliance Defending Freedom. Dr. Bowman, great to be with you today. A lot to get to here, but first, I want to ask you about the timing of all of this. The Reverend, who is an American, was arrested 7 years ago. So why is the European Human Rights Court just getting around to condemning this action now?
Hello, Tracy. It's good to be with you. Yes, that's a very good question. The European Court of Human Rights does take its time. One has to understand that it only becomes active after all domestic remedies have been exhausted, which does take some time. But this case was brought to the court in Strasbourg in 2017, and it has indeed taken 6 years to decide it and was handed down the judgment on March 7th.
And can you talk to us more about his arrest? What sort of prayer gathering was it, and why did it offend the Russian authorities?
I think we can all agree that no one should be arrested for simply inviting people to their home to hold a peaceful prayer gathering and worship God. But that's precisely what happened to Don. Just to give you a little bit of background, in 2005, Don Ossewaarde, originally of Michigan, felt called to Russia as a Christian minister to spread the gospel there. And he did so for well over 10 years, and nobody touched him, really. He obtained permanent residence and obtained a house, and he invited people to this house to gather freely and pray to God. And then in 2016, Russia passed a new law to counter terrorism, as they said. And under this law, it became an offense to actually do what Don did, invite people to their home, and then to gather peacefully and pray, unless they were accredited with some other organizations and with the state. And that's Don was a freely practicing Christian missionary, and that's what got him into trouble.
Would you mind explaining this to us a little bit more, this anti-terrorism law, for those that aren't familiar?
Russia has a long-standing history of not particularly endorsing small and freely operating Christian organizations, and this applies to people like Don Ossewaarde in particular. Whatever they were coming after, it also affected Don Ossewaarde, as he was just inviting people to his home to hold prayer gatherings, and apparently that became forbidden. And it only took 2 months after that law became effective when 3 policemen showed up at his door while they were holding a gathering, and they kindly waited until the service was over, but then they asked him to come with them. He was fingerprinted, and in what we should call a mock trial, really been fined, and he had to pay a fine to the Russian government.
Yeah, we have about a minute left or so, but I do want to ask you this. You know, as Russia continues its war with Ukraine, objectors have held prayer services to end the war, and several religious leaders have spoken out. Do you think this case and the expressed disapproval of the European Court would set a precedent here and hold Russian authorities in check?
I think the case is really important in that it emphasizes a central principle of human rights law. It is a central aspect of freedom of religion to be able to gather freely. Now, unfortunately, Russia is no longer a member of the Council of Europe and is no longer under the jurisdiction of the court. But all the more, this judgment clearly shows that Russia cannot get away with that. And we're very grateful for this judgment, and we endorse it by all counts, because it shows that it is central that everybody should be free to gather and practice their religion, and this is enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights, and that's what the court says, and it has a signal effect on all the countries that are members of the Council of Europe.
Well, Dr. Bowman, thank you for taking the time to speak with us about this. We appreciate it. Pleasure to be with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, taking a closer look. A conference in Rome dives into the journey of the Holy Family in Egypt while addressing migrant issues. New footage tonight of a Catholic church in southern Turkey damaged in the deadly earthquake last month. The area containing the altar and pews was destroyed. The 152-year-old church was one of many buildings in Turkey and Syria destroyed in the quake that killed tens of thousands of people. Our recent conference in Rome took a closer look at the Holy Family's flight to Egypt. The event was organized by the Pontifical Oriental Institute. One speaker noted that Egypt continues to welcome migrants, just as the Holy Family is believed to have fled there from Bethlehem to escape King Herod. Now the transcontinental country is also becoming popular as a Christian pilgrimage destination. We go now to Professor Paolo Branca, member of the Karol Wojtyla International Association, who spoke at last week's conference. Professor, great to be with you today. Can you tell us more about this conference and also the value of Egypt as a place for refugees?
I think in the Old Testament we can find a negative image of Egypt about related to the slavery of the people of Israel in Egypt, but we find also a different role played by this land, where Moses was the liberator, the leader of the Jewish people living in slavery in Egypt, and in the Sinai Mount, they received from our Lord the 10 Commandments. So there is not only a negative, but also a positive role played by Egypt in the Old Testament.
And what more can you tell us about the Holy Family's time there in Egypt? I know the Egyptian government recently launched an initiative highlighting what it says are more than 24 places of interest.
Yes, actually, in the New Testament, we find at the very beginning the role played by Egypt as a place of refuge and hospitality to Jesus, the child Jesus, with the Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph, escaping from the cruelty of the King Herod. So we find again a positive role of this ancient land and civilization at the very beginning of the Gospels. And I think we have a big opportunity, especially now, because the UNESCO recognized the sites where the Holy Family passed through in Egypt as a common heritage of all the humanity.
And Professor, before I let you go quickly, curious, is the country becoming popular for Christian pilgrims?
Many places in Egypt attended to Christian, but also by Muslim, because the Virgin Mary and his son Jesus are in the text of the Quran, the Holy Quran, and the name there, Mary, is the only one female name all over the text of the Quran.
Oh, Professor Branca, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all of this. We really appreciate it. God bless you. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.